There's many online, by the way. People watch these. They message me when I cancel, and they're like, "Oh, you canceled." Sometimes live, I don't know, but like there's maybe 100 regular viewers. Tell me when we're online. We're online? Okay. طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا والحقنا بعبادك الصالحين. So I want to begin, inshallah, because it's been a while. I want to begin with really summarizing all of the history of the seerah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh since the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that we don't just forget everything we talked about. We keep in mind the major lessons and the major beats of the story, right? So remember, in the very beginning we spoke about Saqifat Bani Sa'ida, the election of the Khalifa. And the Khalifa is a position that is elected by the people, and that election should happen according to Islamic principles. And the Sahaba had united upon Abu Bakr being the leader of the Muslimin. We spoke about how difficult of a time it was because this was the founder of this empire, of this Khilafah, was the Prophet ﷺ, had died. And many empires, many nations, they don't survive the death of their founders. And not only that, but he had died very early after the founding of his civilization. And not only that, he had died quite unexpectedly. Like people did not expect the Prophet ﷺ to die when he did. When he got really, really sick, that kind of caught people by surprise. But the Prophet ﷺ did accomplish his major, or his true purpose, which was the proliferation of the message, the establishment of Islam. He had united the Arabian Peninsula, and he had this team Sahaba who could continue the mission. So the Prophet ﷺ died, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was elected. And one thing that was very interesting that we pointed out about this whole situation is that this was really the first time that the Sahaba had to make decisions without the Prophet ﷺ. That's not entirely true. Like there were times where the Sahaba were away from the Prophet and they had to discourse among themselves in order to make decisions, but they could always go back to the Prophet after. It's like, okay, who was right? And the Prophet ﷺ could tell them who was right. But now that was no longer the case. They only had their own ijtihad to go by, which is similar to our situation today. And this is why learning different aspects of our history is very important, because each episode in history tells us something a little bit different about our times, right? The seerah of the Prophet ﷺ is the most important reference point, but there are other reference points depending on what kind of resonances there are between those aspects of history and our current day history. Like one thing I always talk about is the seerah of Isa alayhi salam. Isa alayhi salam, of course, he has a lot of things that are similar to us that were different than with the Prophet ﷺ. He came, he was sent to give da'wah to Muslims, the Muslims of the time, who were the Jews. Likewise, in our situation today, like we have to be, our work today is with the Muslims who have been secularized. We're not here dropped into non-Muslim society, notwithstanding the West. Within our Muslim countries, that revival needs to happen. Like with Isa alayhi salam, you had the Roman occupation of Judea, and today we have a kind of a Western neo-occupation of the Muslim lands. And you had collaborating Jews, and now you have collaborating Muslims, munafiqeen. So anyway, this is very interesting for us because it gets to show us, okay, how does a political situation occur without direct revelation, as was coming to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there were many episodes that we pointed out with respect to the differences between Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and the Sahaba, and in specific Umar radiallahu anhu. They differed on, it almost becomes a stereotype. They differ on almost every single situation. And it sometimes got heated. They sometimes yelled at each other. But at the end of the day, they did so not for ego, but they did so because they had very different views about what was Islamically correct or not. And we did see that in these situations, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu really had the edge. He really understood the deen a little bit better, And Abu Bakr knew how to find the non-obvious answers to questions. One exception to this was, of course, the collection of the Quran, right? Abu Bakr's primary calculus whenever he makes any decision, whether it's collecting the Quran, or appointing Usama bin Zayd to lead the army, or sending the army to attack Sham when the nation had broken out into civil war. Always his primary decision-making mechanism is what was the desire of the Prophet ﷺ. He was very literal about it. He did not want to relitigate the decisions of the Prophet ﷺ, even though the circumstances had changed. He was very reluctant to do so. And he wasn't just totally just blindly following the Prophet ﷺ on those decisions. By the way, we do blindly follow the Prophet ﷺ, but what I'm talking about here is strategic decisions that the Prophet had made, that now that he is dead and the situation is different, things can be relitigated, right? And we spoke about how the Sahaba were very much against, almost in unanimity against some of these decisions, and Abu Bakr stood alone. But we showed how history kind of proved him right, that these decisions ended up being for the benefit of the Muslimin and of great strategic importance. And then we spoke about the specifics of the Hurub al-Ridda, right? What tribes were in revolt, which really the main antagonists of the Hurub al-Ridda were the false prophets. You had Tulayh al-Asadi in Yemen, you had Sajwa, you had Musaylim al-Kadhab, no, not Sajwa, Sajjah. And you had 4 or 5 of these false prophets running around trying to replicate the business model, or what they thought was the business model of the Prophet ﷺ, trying to replicate the formula of success. Of course, that formula depended on divine reality, not just claims to prophethood. And really what made the Muslims win at the end of the day, it was that they out-organized the enemy. They were relentless and organized. Whereas the enemy was chaotic, they were opportunistic, they were bickering among themselves, this false prophet versus that false prophet. They were always selling each other out. This is the level of intrigue and betrayal that was occurring, not just towards the Muslim, but even between the murtaddeen. So the Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was really helped by several early victories that made conquering the rest of these apostated tribes pretty easy over the long run, except for Musaylim al-Kadhab, because Musaylim al-Kadhab, he actually lost the first couple of engagements when Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl attacked, and then the next attack after that. And so this emboldened the army of Musaylimah, and we spoke about how the Battle of Yamama was very bloody for the Muslims and for the non-Muslims, right? We lost a lot of early Sahaba, or a lot of founding Sahaba, we lost them. And so that was really the end of the Hurub al-Ridda was with the killing of Musaylim al-Kadhab, ending his rebellion, okay? Now, what happens after this? That was basically the summary of everything we spoke about so far. What happens now is that really there wasn't really any time for the Muslims to relax before Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu decides we need to go and attack and conquer Persia. Of course, Persia as an empire occupies not just Persia as we know it today, but it occupies Iraq. Okay, not only that, but this area of the world has many Arabs in it, Arab tribes, which are loyal to the Persians. Hurub al-Ridda was between the Muslims, the capital Medina, and the Arab tribes who had given allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ and then revoked that allegiance, right? Because they saw an opportunity, they saw that, oh, we chose to follow the Prophet. Who are you, Abu Bakr? We don't agree with you. So, but the tribes that were loyal to the Arabs were that were loyal to the Persians never gave their allegiance, right? Because they're with the superpower, right? And so Al-Muthanna ibn al-Haritha is a very important name to know. Al-Muthanna is one of the heroes of this era of Islamic history. And you'll find his name in many anashid. If you listen to Arabic anashid, like he's one of the kind of names that I tend to see like a lot. And he was, so his story, let's talk about Al-Muthanna's story. Al-Muthanna was part of the Banu Shayban tribe, and this was a tribe that was like near Persia, and they had a treaty with Persia. This is back in the time when the Prophet ﷺ was going around to the different tribes, pitching Islam, trying to find a new home for his civilization. And the Banu Shayban tribe was that tribe which had famously said, "Yes, O Prophet, you are true. We believe in this. This makes sense. We would love to follow you, but we have one issue, which is that we have a treaty with the Persians." Okay? And Al-Muthanna was there. I don't think he was the number one head guy, but he was like part of that inner circle. And he was believing in the Prophet ﷺ at that time. But the Prophet ﷺ could not accept a pledge of allegiance from a tribe, could not accept a tribe to be the new home of the Khilafah, while they had a regional rival that they could not deal with, which was the Persians. Actually, when you read the story, this tribe was ready to break their treaty with the Persians. They're like, you know what, you want us to break the treaty? We'll break the treaty. Like, even though we have this treaty, we'll dispense with it. But the relative power between this little Arab tribe, who was a vassal of the Persians, and the Persians themselves was such a huge gulf that the Prophet ﷺ knew, he could not enforce his own sovereignty, enforce his own independence in this city. So this is, when we speak about the fiqh of da'wah, it's a very important reality that establishing an Islamic system somewhere requires that state to have the sufficient capability to protect itself against its regional rivals, whereas that tribe did not. Al-Muthanna, this is when he told the Prophet ﷺ before he left, he told him, "Verily you have come with a thing that the kings hate. Verily you have come with a thing, this Islam, that the kings hate." So again, this tells us something about what Islam is that many people don't understand. Why would the kings hate Islam? Well, Islam threatens their dominion. Islam threatens their authority. It takes away from them the right of legislation, which is what kingship is all about, because it says Allah is the king, right? So Al-Muthanna understood that, and he told that to the Prophet ﷺ. But during Aam al-Wufud, the delegations came to the Prophet ﷺ way after. This is now maybe 10 years later. And the Prophet ﷺ is accepting delegates, and people are giving him the Pledge of Allegiance, that the Arabian Peninsula is being united. This tribe comes into the fold, who had been Muslim for a long time. At least some of the leaders were Muslim for a long time. So Al-Muthanna goes to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu after the end of the civil war, and he encourages him and he exhorts him, "Let's go fight the Persians. I'm ready to go and fight my people. Not my people, the Persians, but my people, the Arabs who are fighting with the Persians." Those are his people, right? "Let's go fight my people. I'm ready to go." So he convinces Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and Abu Bakr didn't really need much convincing. He knew the importance of keeping up the momentum of the expansion of Islam. Okay, and this is a very important concept. It's an important concept about life, which is the concept of momentum, or the concept of inertia, which is that you can't very well like succeed very heavily at something and then stop and then try to recapture that success. You always have to, in life, whether you're as an individual trying to succeed at whatever it is that you're doing, or as a nation, you have to keep up the momentum of operating at 100%. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu understood that. He didn't want to wait 1 year before going and attacking the Persians. He knew that his people had a specific fighting spirit. He knew that there was a specific kind of morale. He didn't want people to start to relax and to get used to the peace and to get used to, chilling. No. He had to get people to move, right? So Uh, and what's interesting, and here's a reflection I had, when you read the seerah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh and Umar and the Sahaba, you notice that they had a specific attitude towards life. And they understood what causes success. Okay? And we spoke about that in terms of their level of organization, the amount of feedback they used to gather from people, the risks that they would take, the bold decisions that they would take, how quick they were, the speed of their decisions, the speed of their actions. And of course now, like, this idea of keeping up the momentum of the success of the state, like, you have to wonder, like, where did they get that from? Because this is the kind of stuff that, empires learn, right? If you were like Musa alayhi salam growing up in the palace of the Pharaoh, why is the Pharaoh the Pharaoh? The Pharaoh is the Pharaoh because he won on a material level, right? Or his father won, or his grandfather won, or his great-grandfather won. And when you win because you were better than everybody else and you understood the rules of success better than everybody else, then you teach that to your kids, their kids teach that to their kids. You maintain that kind of culture of victory, that tradition of victory. Well, the Sahaba, they weren't conquerors, they weren't emperors, they weren't like that. I'm not saying they weren't successful people before Islam, they were, but they weren't at those heights of success. They had to learn that through the seerah. They had to learn that in their struggles with the Prophet ﷺ. They made the mistakes and they gained the learnings. So by the time that Abu Bakr radiallahu anh is now the leader, he not only has his whole life experience before the seerah, but he has his life experience from the seerah itself, which is those 23 years, which are more valuable than probably the rest of his life by 10 times. And so he understood how to do these things. And today, when we understand success, when we understand like how to revive the ummah and keep the ummah strong, we have to think in terms of what are the principles for success, and not just like this idea that we're going to rely on just Allah and making dua and hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to do the job for us. It doesn't work like that. Okay? So here's what happens now. Abu Bakr, there's another point here to make, which is that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu deciding to attack Persia, this is not the first foreign expedition. There were some foreign expeditions before this in Sham, where the Prophet ﷺ ordered one to attack, and then Abu Bakr continued the attack on the Romans, the Battle of Mut'ah, and the army of Usama bin Zayd attacking to follow up with that, and they did some raids. But this was the first intentional effort to actually like conquer an enemy empire. Okay? And so there's the concept here that Islam is something that expands. And one thing that we hear Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu saying is that when he appoints Khalid ibn al-Walid as the commander, and he appoints al-Muthanna to be subordinate to Khalid ibn al-Walid, he tells Khalid when he attacks to go and win over the hearts of the Iraqi people, right? So why does he speak like that? Why does he speak in terms of winning over the hearts and minds, even though this is a military expedition? Well, you have to understand what is the energy and the mindset behind Islamic conquest and Islamic expansion. The concept here behind Islamic expansion is the idea that we expand justice. The idea that it's the Islamic system, which is the divinely revealed law, is the only system that is capable of achieving justice. And when you look at, civilizations, be it the Persian Empire or the Roman Empire or the various empires and nations of today, the situation you have is that you have a small minority of people at the top who choose to exercise a specific system upon the rest. And this leads to the tyrannization, subjugation, exploitation of the majority of the population in any country, right? So many people might look at like Islamic expansion. Here's two things that you have to understand. Most people, they have a limited understanding of why we even have Islamic expansion. They think in terms of, well, you know, if the Muslims didn't expand, then we would be expanded upon, right? And that's why the Khilafah, you know, expanded into Persia and Rome and the West and the East and the North and all of that. There is a truth to that, but that's not the full reason. This is what they call in international relations offensive realism. Offensive realism being the idea that you must attack or you will be attacked. Okay? But that's not the whole truth. That's not the whole truth of why there is jihad. That's not the whole truth of the historical Islamic expansions. The whole truth is that it is a duty, a moral duty upon the Muslimin, that when we see lands that are being held hostage by a small percentage of people to exploit it and to apply their kufr laws to it, which lead to injustice, they think that they can do a better job than Allah. They have put themselves in a position which only belongs to Allah. When we see that, there is a moral imperative that we have between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a duty, and between us and those people, those subjugated people, those people who would who don't deserve to be ruled by tyrannical man-made laws. So there is this liberation ideology to Islam, which is like we must go and free the peoples of the world from man-made tyranny. And this is best encapsulated maybe in the speech of Rabi'i ibn Amir radiyallahu anhu to Rustum. Do you know about this, Rustum and Rabi'i? When he said, okay, so this is an interesting story. So this is later on in the conquests. I believe this is during the Khilafah of Umar radiyallahu anhu. So we'll get to it eventually, but it's relevant to this point, which is that you know, Rustum, he's a Persian general. He's delaying. He doesn't want the Muslims to attack, so he starts to initiate diplomatic relations. He sends emissaries, and he wants an emissary to come back, so they send Rabi'i ibn Amir, and he's a Sahabi, and you know, he comes into the luxurious palace of Rustum, and you know, all the gold and all the servants and all this, all that. He makes a little bit of a show for him, and he tells Rabi'i, you know, tell me, what have you been sent with? What is this Islam? So these are always interesting because you get to see, like, how do Sahaba pitch Islam to people who never heard about it before, who are non-Arabs even, not even Arabs, right? That's very interesting. So Rabi'i says, he says some speech, and he includes in it that Islam is إخراج العباد من عبادة العباد إلى عبادة رب العباد. Meaning, Islam is about extracting or liberating mankind from subservience to the creation to subservience to the creator of the creation. And that's the reality, right? Like, we look around the world, the only thing that Islam says different, or what Islam says different about the world today, is that while we have a situation where humans are subjugating humans, this leads to injustice and tyranny and inefficiency. The right configuration is to remove those human subjugators and to replace them with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the only one who we should be subjugated towards, because that will be a benevolent subjugation. It's the kind of subjugation that we need to have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be our benevolent overlord. And that is the message of Islam, as Rabi'i ibn Amir put it. This is the understanding of the expansion. Like, it's not for wealth, it's not for prestige, it's not even for self-defense. Even though that's one of the reasons, this is not the full reason. It's for this grand mission that Islam has, for world liberation. Big words, but this is the reality. So, like we said, Khalid ibn al-Walid and al-Muthanna were appointed to raid Persia. So in the beginning, al-Muthanna's army went ahead and it started doing some raids. Raids are not full battles, you know, they come and they collect some, they loot some of the cities, and they got some booty. And then the Battle of the Chains happened. The Battle of the Chains I don't know if we have enough time to get into it, but it's one of the important battles in Persian history because there was a level of hubris that the enemy had. It's called the Battle of the Chains because the enemy chained up their troops, literally with chains, on the battlefield in order to kind of make a statement that we're not going to run away. The army is not going to retreat. So the Persians were maybe like 40,000 troops, and the Muslims were 10 to 20,000. And the Muslims were the attackers, so the Persians had the defensive advantage in the Battle of the Chains. This was the third week of Muharram in the 12th year of after the Hijrah. Okay, so what's interesting is Khalid ibn Walid. He had a very interesting strategy to fool the Persians, because what really the victory hinged on being able to outmaneuver the Persian army. So what he did is that he went to Yemen, or he didn't. He had a letter sent from Yemen to Hormuz, who was the enemy leader, and essentially, the letter was like a threat. You have to accept Islam, or we're going to come attack you, and etc., etc., etc. From Khalid ibn Walid, and it's dated. It's postmarked in Yemen, and the fact that it was postmarked in Yemen, it gave Hormuz a false impression that this would be the route of attack, that he would come up from Yemen and come to the city that they were trying to take, which is Ubada. Whereas Khalid was not in Yemen, or he was not going to attack from Yemen. So while they were expecting them to come up with it from a specific route, they expected them to hit this list of cities. So like, there's a specific list of cities that you would hit if you were going up from the south, okay? And so they positioned their army along that route at that first city, whereas Khalid, having sent that letter to give them that false impression, actually went through a different route, and he was going through a different city. So by the time he was within vision, by the time he was within sight of the enemy army, it was too late. And when the scouts reported back to the Persian army that, oh my God, Khalid is actually over here, we screwed up, they booked it. Like, they started running to defend. And by the time they met Khalid's army, the Persian army was exhausted. And this exhaustion, according to historians, was like instrumental in the Persian defeat. Even though, of course, they were the empire, they were better equipped, they had more numbers, but they were exhausted, and the Muslim army was fresh. Okay, I'll get into the details of it next time. We'll talk about what the negotiations were before the battle, and we'll talk about the relation between Khalid ibn Walid and the Persian general Hormuz, because they do have a duel, and there is some trickery afoot in terms of there was an assassination attempt on Khalid before the battle. Any questions about anything that we discussed so far? I know it's Maghrib time, so I have to stop. No questions? طيب. بارك الله فيكم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خير, and we'll see you all next week. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله